wanted to ask first about making a film about setting the record straight, setting the record of one's life straight. You've made films, of course, people who know your work, that are confessional, that are often epistolary, and something that sets this film apart is that it's about confessing to a camera, about feeling like one cannot be honest until they're in front of the camera. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
I'm not much of a fan. Not much of a fan of films about films. It's only a handful I even like. So it's not something I would come up with on my own. Russell had, originally made it an artist, but he was smart enough to not change it to be a filmmaker. If I had made it a filmmaker, I would change it to be an artist. But that was the deck he dealt, and I was drawn in not only by the time of my life. I said to Russell, I said, if I'm going to make a film about dying, I better hurry up. and he didn't live to see me finish the script. So, and he called the script his Ivan Illich, and then it became my Ivan Illich.
Did you work closely with Russell before he passed on the script?
Well, I would spend several weeks with him every summer up in Keene, just hanging and hiking, and going chasing dogs. And then whenever he came into the city, we would get together. And so he called, I wrote and I said, what's a good week for me to come up? And he said, not this one. And I had written a script about female sexual irresponsibility, and I really didn't feel that was my métier, my backyard. I opted it to Elizabeth Moss to direct, and I said that I shouldn't be doing that. I feel about that. I should be in a film about the degradations and the depredations of dying and the kinds of remorses and freedoms that process must give. It's truly a speculation, don't tell. I mean, we've all known people who died very angry, like Susan Sontag. People who died quite content. I guess you don't know till your time comes.
Michael, Uma, it's quite a subject for a film. It's quite a project to step into. Can you talk to us about learning the project, reading the script, and deciding to sign on? It's quite a subject.
Well, I mean, Paul Schrader's making a movie, so you want to be, possibility of being a part of it was, for an actor, fantastic, and then Uma and Richard was icing on the cake for me, personally. I kept looking at it from the point of view of art. There's sometimes a vampiric quality to art when you're using real material, and you're willing to really be invasive and steal and take, and there's an element of art and artists that have that kind of mercenary quality to it, and art is the justification for it, and that was the kind of the point of view that I took.
Well, I mean, Paul Schrader, I'm a really big fan of Paul Schrader. So to get to contribute, to sort of lend myself to his piece and get to see him working was a real privilege. The movie was shot in a very precise, quick way. There was not a lot of time. And to see a sort of master of cinema who, is going to have to go in and know precisely exactly what he wants and needs, and all of this sort of has the entire vernacular language of cinema at his fingertips, was just breathtaking. I think the entire cast and crew were all there for Paul, and just learned so much just watching him as sort of a master, so centered. And I would say a big softie. I was very nervous to meet him, this macho filmmaker, made these legendary films. And as I was on my way to the meeting, a person driving me was Googling him. She's like, oh my God, he's a huge Taylor Swift fan. And I was like, what? And then I read Paul's quote or tweet about defending Taylor, and I was like, oh, I'm fine. I'm in this meeting with this macho man is going to be just fine. I'm in good hands.
It's an interesting point when you talk about autobiographical work versus fictional work. Now, Foregone, Russell's novel, this is probably the most autobiographical he ever got. A lot of that stuff was in his autobiography, a lot of the scenes were. And but in the novel, in the book, in his autobiography comes off okay, but in the novel he wrote, it comes off just terrible. And I said to Chase, his wife, I said, I have a feeling that Russell makes his actions seem worse than they were because it makes him happier. And she said, exactly.
Something that I think quite moves me about your two characters in particular, and this triangle between the two of you and Richard Gere, are these competing impulses to get the material to serve the ego of the film that you're making, but also the conflict with protection, to protect the history, to protect the truth. Working with Richard on this must have been pretty remarkable. I think it's an incredible performance.
Well, I've been asked why I did. After we did American Gigolo, he got quite hot. And started doing big movies with big salaries. And I was pretty much sticking to my handmade films. And he started to get kind of movie star mannerisms, which I wasn't that crazy about. And so I didn't think about it that much. And then when I'm writing this script, and I knew I had a fastball coming down the center of the plate, that any good aging actor will knock this thing out of the park. It's just too well written. So, what can I do to give it some buzz? We've seen Anthony Hopkins do this role. You've seen Jonathan Pryce do this role. You've seen Tommy Lee Jones do this role. So how do I get something in there that has a buzz factor? And I started thinking, Richard's never played old. And if he were here, now you could see why. He's 75, and it's easier to make him look 60 than it is to make him look 80. So I thought that would be interesting. People hopefully will hear about the film and say, aging Richard Gere. Said, oh, I wonder what that looks like. You always need to have that first little bit of bait on the hook to arouse people's curiosity. And so that's really why I went to Richard first. And I'll tell you stuff, but I'll tell one more story. I was sitting next to Richard when Ethan Hawke was getting an award for First Reformed. Hello, professors. And Ethan said to me, "How did you get him to do so little?" I mean, Richard said, "How did you get Ethan to do so little?" And then a couple of years later, when I called him up, I said, "You remember when you asked me that question, Richard? We're going to find out now."
And as a scene partner, what was it like working with him?
I found it to be wonderful. I actually worked with him once when I was a teenager. And he's a very nice man, and it's a beautiful and sad story. It's particularly a beautiful piece of writing. Just in case.
A lot of our stuff was using, actually done with that Interrotron device. So I'm looking into my monitor, seeing Richard, and he's looking into his, seeing me, which was a really wild way to work, because there's a intimacy, but there's also a detachment, rather than just sitting face to face with someone. It's really wild. And the fact that those cameras were always running, as were the other cameras in the room, it was like a bizarre three-dimensional chess thing that Paul had to figure out how to shoot that stuff, because there was a lot of point of views and cameras in that room all the time. We were in there for quite a while doing all the documentary footage stuff, but it's a pretty fascinating way to work. It was.
Yes, this is a
Like FaceTime.
Yeah, it's like
This is a mosaic film. The only other mosaic film I did was Misha. The mosaics are tricky because you take like a vase, you drop it on the floor, and then you start picking up the pieces and see how you can reshape them. And so, but Russell's novel had also been mosaic. And so I had to be very, very clear-headed. And until recently, I was very proud to say there is no unused setup in the entire film. Every setup is there. And then we cut out the epilogue. But except for the epilogue, every setup we used. And I don't know how much you know about filmmaking, but the ratio is usually much different than that.
Speaking of bait on the hook, you also worked with Jacob Elordi, which for a different generation is a very, very big deal. What was that like? Because to your point about kind of Richard Gere working on American Gigolo and becoming a kind of bigger Hollywood star, Jacob Elordi is, for the Euphoria aged crowd, the star of the moment right now. So it was an interesting source for you.
Well, you have a casting person, and you start posing the question. You come up with names, clips of people, and I did a Zoom with Jake. I thought it was pretty good, and then I went out to Los Angeles and had dinner with my friend Brett Easton Ellis, and Brett has a big hang up about American Gigolo. It was his sort of coming out film. He's written articles about it. He uses it in his book. I said, Brett, I'm trying to cast the young Richard Gere. I said, oh, you can't do that. There is no young Richard Gere. You'll never find him. And I said, well, I just was Zooming with this young actor named Jacob Elordi. And Brett said, stop right there. I just came in my pants. So I guess we got the BEE seal of approval.
I am so glad I asked that question.
What restaurant was that called? At the Chateau.
Before we're out of time, one thing I wanted to make sure to ask you about was the music. I think that the first time I saw this, being familiar with your kind of recent stretch of films, I think the earlier music cues were the first thing that tipped me off for this being a different tone. And I found myself like immensely moved by what the music adds to this film. I wonder if you could tell us more about it.
Yeah, well, I like to use new composers because there aren't that many film solutions, music solutions to film. There may be 12 or 15, scared, eerie, chaotic. And if anybody has done 5 or 6 movies, they know all the cues. And then they just plug them in. And they work very fast, and probably get another salary. But when you hire someone who's never done a movie before, they're terrified. And they're trying to figure out, how can I solve these problems? What does it sound like when the woman is worried that her husband may be out with another woman? What does that sound like? Old-time composers said, oh, what that sounds like. And so I worked with Jack Nietzsche and Giorgio Moroder and Jim Grohl. I used Michael Beam, and I used his son, Robert Beam, from Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, Devontae Hines, Les Mord. So I tend to Scott Johnson, odd New York composers that you probably never heard of. And it's very labor intensive for a director's point of view because you're having to go through it all with them, back and forth, use temp cues and explain. But on the other hand, it is also terribly enjoyable as opposed to having a professional film scorer come in and say, you know, little tinkle piano here, a little boom boom here. Okay, we're all done. And so the first question you ask is, will it be electronic or symphonic? And then the next question is, will there be songs? And if there are songs, will there be a song cycle, meaning one person sings all the songs? And I used the song cycle in Like Sleeper. I thought, oh, this might be nice to go back to a song cycle again. And Phosphorescent I'd seen them in concert in Brooklyn Steel. I really liked them. I always had them in the back of my mind. And Matt Halkridge, their guy, lives down in Nashville. So we went down to Nashville for 3 weeks. It was a lot of fun. But I just prefer that way to work because music is something I'm extremely jealous about. I've played instruments. I never could get the hang of it. I don't have the ear for it. I can't do it. So I just love hanging around people who can.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you.